Welcome to my channel, Julianne Makes Art. For this drawing, you're just only going to need the colors red, orange, peach, brown, and black. I drew the initial guidelines in pencil and erased as much as I could while still being able to see them. Start with outlining the major shapes in red, which is sort of the mid-tone color of the bird. Since we're using crayons, definitely don't worry about drawing every single feather detail. And if you can't tell, I'm not applying very much pressure, especially in the first stages of coloring the bird. Bear in mind, crayons are very messy and you will need to brush and wipe your drawing often, but make sure and be careful not to smear the page or your drawing. You might have trouble finding a sharpener that will fit your crayon. And be sure to designate a sharpener just for your crayons because the wax is pretty difficult to remove. I was using new crayons with this drawing, so I actually didn't end up sharpening any of them, but I did make sure to rotate to keep the tip pretty sharp but not too sharp. Don't apply a lot of pressure so you can build values on the beak and everywhere else on your drawing. This also just creates a more rich color palette to your finished piece. Another tip with working with crayons, since I'm actually totally new to it as well, is you don't want them to be too sharp because the tip will break off quite easily. Use a circular pattern to mimic the small feathers on the upper back. Use some brown, which is a cooler color, to give texture to the back so the wings will visually pop forward more. Use black for the darkest values, the shadows, and for defining the feathers. I would generally recommend working from lighter colors to darker if you're layering because you might end up with streaks instead of a smooth color transition. I wasn't too worried about streaking colored lines because the bird has dark red on it already. Be sure to subscribe to support my channel. As you can see, I don't spend a lot of time in just one area because I want there to be consistency with the color and texture throughout the whole bird. Here, use red orange, which is a warmer color, for adding dimension to the wings and the tail feathers. Warmer colors appear closer to the viewer and they tend to pop more in the foreground. At this stage, you can start applying more pressure with the red to fill in the white of the paper. Use brown for darkening red areas and blending the shadows. This will make the black look less harsh. Use a flicking stroke for the head and underbelly feathers to soften the tips. Start with pressure, then quickly lift to create a wispy effect. Don't worry about getting too detailed with the legs and claws. Using a narrower or sharpened crayon is vital for the legs and claws. You really just want to capture the shape that you see in your reference photo. Go over the brown with black to define the legs and the claws. One thing about crayons that I learned from this is that black goes over lighter colors a lot easier than vice versa, in the same way that colored pencils work as well. Use peach for the lighter parts of the tree stump. Here, go backwards from light to dark. This prevents muddy colors, which you can see would definitely happen with the light peach color if I used the dark colors first. Use brown and black to add texture to the wood. Limiting the colors of the stump keeps the emphasis on the bird. For the tree stump, I did rely heavily on the reference photo to try and achieve the texture of the wood. Use black to define the edges and details. Follow your reference, but omit details when necessary. Omitting some details is definitely important because you want the emphasis on the bird, and also the medium doesn't really allow for hyperrealism in any way. Use black to fill in the face and eye area since you will define the eye with a white pen or paint. Again, I waited to fill in the face because I did not want any black streaks in the top of his head. Make sure to use the flicking motion again for the neck feathers so you can get that nice wispy look. Use either a sharpened crayon or the edge of it to draw the mouth on the beak. Do your best to draw it in one stroke to keep it clean. At this stage, it's a good time to assess where you need to add darker values, finish any details. Use as much pressure as you're comfortable with to get to the red that you want. Just be careful not to break your crayon by pressing too hard. I would recommend keeping the paper wrapping on and just peeling off as you need to because it actually helps keep the crayon from breaking as easily. And just like how I use colored pencil, use peach to blend the beak and the wood to make them look smoother. Here is my biggest takeaway from doing this drawing. I would not recommend using a gel pen. The crayon wax does not allow an easy application. I had to apply very little pressure to glide over the crayon to get the ink to show up. I had to keep wiping off the tip of the pen, and I was actually worried I might have ruined my pen, but because I kept it clean, I didn't ruin it. In the future, I may attempt to scrape off any part that I want white and then use the pen over it, or simply use a tiny paintbrush with some acrylic paint. I personally did not like the look of the white highlights. It was too stark of a contrast, so I eventually used the pen to scrape off the ink until I was happy with it. The final stages of any art piece is completely subjective. If I had added more white highlights to the feathers, had the pen been working, I may have left them and added a lot more. Working with crayons is actually quite challenging and yet very rewarding if you achieve the style that you were looking for. I was pretty happy with how realistic this bird looked. I still have a lot to learn with my drawing skills, so the proportions are a little off, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. I hope this video was of value to you. Be sure to comment with any tutorial requests and subscribe to support my channel.